Uh, so I know it will be helpful to hear from you too.
Sure. So for the record, I'm Rosie Kruger. I'm the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. And I've been the State Director since 2019, and I've worked in the Child Nutrition Programs in Vermont since 2013. AOE is the state agency that is responsible for implementing the federal child nutrition programs in Vermont. So the biggest of those is the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, all the school meals programs. But we also operate the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which provides meals in childcare centers, and the Summer Meals Program, as well as the USDA Foods Program, which provide foods purchased by the federal government to schools and also to food pantries. And we operate that through the Vermont Food Bank. So all these are federal programs. They have federal regulations, lots of federal regulations. Then along with those regulations comes federal funding for all these programs. We pass that through to schools and other child nutrition sponsors at the local level. And then we play an oversight role of making sure that they're following those federal regulations. And then we also administer a relatively smaller amount of state funding to support these programs. So you heard from Connor on my team about the local foods incentive earlier this week. So that's one of our programs. And then there's a couple of other smaller pots of state funds that go to supplement and support these programs. So it's just a little bit of context. I have a team of staff at the agency who help me manage all of these programs and are out in the field all the time, making sure that all those federal rules are being followed and giving lots of technical assistance to help folks follow them. So today, I'm not going to, I gave you a 14-page written testimony. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I wanted you to have all of this background information in case additional questions come up. So we're going to spend a lot of time today looking at this chart, this table, that sort of gives you an overview of where we were before universal meals and sort of where we're at now in terms of the number of meals we're serving and where all the money is coming from and going. So we'll spend a bunch of time talking about that. I also have some additional information within the packet here. Each year of the child nutrition programs is a little bit different. There's a change to federal rules. Sometimes it's a lot different. So I've gone through in the packet and sort of described what was going on each year that was a little different and may have contributed to differences. So sometimes there was some additional federal money. Sometimes we had a COVID pandemic that may have changed what was going on. So that background is all here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the nuances between those different years. Also in the packet is a bunch of text on why costs are particularly lower this year than we estimated just last spring. So people were surprised to see that drop this year, and I want to talk through what happened there. And then I've included a bunch of information that I don't think we'll have time to get into today about plate waste. People always have questions about plate waste in the child nutrition programs. We've done a lot of work and research on that, and so I included all of that information here. Certainly, if you have specific questions on that, we can talk about that. And because this is the Agriculture Committee, I have included a section on the impact on the child nutrition programs on local food purchasing. And then I don't want to leave here today without giving a plug for the summer food service program and the after-school snack program and supper program, and asking for your help in identifying some additional sites where we can set those programs up. We have some enormous opportunity this year to expand those programs, and they all use federal money. There's no state money needed for those programs. So this isn't an ask for money. This is just an ask for your knowledge about where would be good program locations within your communities. So I do want to spend some time at the end today talking about that. All right, so if that all sounds good to you, and please stop me at any point and ask questions. We'll start walking you through this table. All right, so in the top left here, we're starting up in school year 18-19, which was the last full school year before we experienced free meals for all students in Vermont. During the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of flexibilities in the federal regulations, which allowed us to use full federal funding to support free school meals for all students. And so that, of course, happened in March of 2020. 2020. We're coming up on 5 years. And so I'm not giving you school year 1920 information because that was a mixed year. We started out under pricing programs and then moved over. And I'm also not giving you information on school year 2020 to 21 because that was also just a really weird year in terms of what the federal regulations were allowing us to do, who we were feeding, how it was all working. So we're using 18-19 as sort of our last year of operating pricing programs in Vermont. But actually in that year, about 69 schools in Vermont offered free meals to all students under the federal programs. And there are 2 options to do that, the community eligibility provision and provision 2, which are, you don't have to remember those, but those are what those options are. And so any school participating in the National School Lunch Program has the option to participate in those federal universal meals options, but they have to come up with a non-federal source of funds to offset the costs. They can't do the program for less and charge those costs to the program. Typically, lower income schools, so schools with a population of lower income, get more federal funding for that. And so it's easier for them to come up with these smaller local share of dollars to participate in the universal meals programs. And so that's what we saw happening in 2018, 2019. There were, like I said, 69 schools that were participating in either CEP or Provision 2, and they were using some local funds to do that. So that year we had about 84,000 students enrolled in our schools. This enrollment number is not public school enrollment. This is all the children who were enrolled in schools participating in the National School Lunch Program. So that includes about 20 independent schools. And it doesn't include students who are enrolled in public schools, but attending school somewhere that doesn't offer the National School Lunch Program. So if they're placed out of state or that kind of thing, that doesn't include them. So that's why that number is a little bit different from some of the other school enrollment numbers you might see. Our free and reduced percentage is the number of children who qualified for free and reduced price meals. So these are meals that are fully paid for by the federal government. The reduced price meals, the federal government paid for most of that, except for 30 cents for lunch, or 30 cents for breakfast and 40 cents for lunch. That the state was picking up the tab on, and that appropriation was fairly small, under $500,000 a year for the state to cover that. So you see free and reduced everywhere, but know that in Vermont, that meant to the household that the meals were free. And these are families that are under 185% of the federal poverty level. That year we served
185% of the federal
poverty level, yeah. So reduced is under 185% FPL, and then free is under 130% FPL. But we tend to group them in for these purposes. And so we were serving about 7.5 million meals every year, and that meant an average daily participation. So the number of kids who eat meals every day at school was about 51%. Breakfast, our average daily participation was lower, only about 28%. And to do that, we were bringing in about $21.8 million in federal funds. We were also getting an additional $2.4 million in USDA foods. Those are those foods I mentioned that the federal government purchases to support the meals programs. There was not yet a education fund appropriation for universal school meals, so that's an NA there. And then you can't quite see it, but over on the side, this column says education fund impact from local budget transfers. And so this is additional spending on the school meals programs that each school district was either proactively appropriating during their budgeting process at the start of the year, saying, we are going to put in another, $50,000 to support our meals program this year. Or at the end of the year, if they had a negative balance in the nonprofit school food service account, either because they hadn't budgeted correctly or because they were unpaid meal charges, they have to make up that fund with funds from their school general fund, which impacts the statewide education fund. And so that also is included in this bucket. So we were seeing that schools were contributing about $6.5 million in local funding, again, impacting the statewide education fund there.
I want to make sure, sorry to interrupt, Rosie, but since we can't see that all there, I want to make sure.
Those are millions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's 6.4 million, almost $6.5 million in the top row.
Yeah.
6477555.
Sorry, question, Chairman. Thank you. So the 6.4 in 2018-19, that is transfers. So and can you just describe a little bit more about where that money came from or where it was going?
Yeah, so it means that I guess all of these programs, the school meals programs, operate out of what's called the nonprofit school food service account. So each supervisory district, supervisory union needs to have a nonprofit school food service account where all of these federal funds come in. They're restricted funds. They can't be used for scoreboards and textbooks and other stuff. They have to be used on the school meals program. So those funds come in there. Any charges that the families pay go in there. Any state funds to support the meals programs go in there. And ideally, that's going to be a break-even fund. And, it pays for all the costs of the meals programs. If it's not break-even, federal regulations don't allow you to carry over a negative balance from year to year. And so the school board is going to have to make up that negative balance from their school general fund, which is basically the statewide education fund just coming at the local level. And so that's one thing that might have happened is at the end of the year, there was a negative balance. And then, of course, school boards always have the option to present a budget to voters that says, we really believe in local foods. We want to support our program with another $100,000 to do local foods. Or, we have seen that in the past bunch of years, we've had to make this transfer rather than having it be sort of a surprise at the end of the year. We're going to proactively go ahead and transfer this amount. Some of that is impacted by unpaid meal charges. So when families don't pay their meal charges, that can't be absorbed by the nonprofit school food service account. That has to be covered by, again, those local general funds. So all of that is shown in that 6.477 million there.
So once we get into like last year where it's 7.5, that obviously that wouldn't be factoring in students that didn't pay. Because,
Right.
So what would that number be mostly coming from then in last year?
Yeah. So in your packet, when I talk about school year 22-23 and 23-24, the federal reimbursement per meal increased temporarily during the pandemic.
Okay.
And then it decreased in school year 22-23 and 23-24. So just between school year 23-24, school year 22-23, 23-24, schools lost 8 cents per lunch in the amount of reimbursement they were getting. At the same time, food costs went up, staff costs went up. And so that's basically that shortage is in part the amount more that it costs to operate the program that the reimbursement wasn't covering. But it is also, we have really varying levels of skills, education, time dedicated to these programs across all of our 52 public school food authorities. And we've noticed that while this number here is increasing, we're now at 7.5 million, the number of school food authorities requiring a general fund transfer has actually fallen significantly since 18-19. So there were only 7 school food authorities that did not need a general fund transfer in 18-19, meaning most of them needed a general fund transfer at the end of the year. In pretty consistently, school year 21-22 through now, 23-24, we've had 19 school food authorities that have not needed a general fund transfer. So that's showing us that when they're fully funded under, they're getting all that funding and not having to charge families, there is a potential to operate at break even and not need that additional funding. And of those 19, 7 of those programs that are breaking even and not needing a general fund transfer are self-operated, which means they don't use a food service management company. So they're not just going out to bid sort of for the lowest price there. And they operate really high quality programs, including some that are participating in the local foods incentive and actually achieving that 15% local purchasing threshold. So it's not, we're seeing from that it is possible to operate a program within that reimbursement and to operate a high quality program within that reimbursement, but not everybody's doing it. So one of the next steps for us is, in my team, is reaching out to those 7 school food authorities who are clearly doing a good job at managing their programs and finding out what's going on. What are they doing really well? And figuring out how we can then take that and spread that knowledge and practice to the rest of the 52 school food authorities in the state.
One other quick question related, is the number to the left of the second to the left, does that include the number all the way to the right? So like in,
it's separate numbers.
so the total impact on the education fund would be the second from the left plus
Exactly.
the one on the right.
So, one of the goals of my team is how do we take this $7.5 million and bring that down? And we think there's room to do that. One of the things that we're seeing is in those schools where they are not breaking even and they're having to do significant general fund transfers, there's never been a conversation with the food service director about what their budget is. And so you're kind of putting a food service director in a really tough position where how are they supposed to stick to a budget if they don't know what it is? It may also be that there is not the education happening about, here is how you do purchasing in a way that will maximize your budget. We have some really excellent food service directors in the state who are really good at figuring out what is your cost per meal based on the entree and the sides and how do you manage that? And that's not happening everywhere. We have some really excellent, well-trained folks who have good communications with their business office and understand, all of this, and other folks who are really struggling. And so figuring out how to make that more uniform across the state in the right direction is something that we're working on.
Rosie, with the column on the right, just continuing the same conversation, would that far right column include, for example, the earliest year of the chart, those 69 schools that
It does.
that had decided to support? So that wasn't a very large number. It's a smaller number than the bottom number on that same column.
Yeah, so the 69 schools that were participating in Universal Meals that year were typically these really high poverty schools where the federal funding covered most of the costs. And the way that the federal funding works when you do Universal Meals, if you are a higher poverty school, you can participate in the community eligibility provision. And if 62.5% or more of your students are directly certified for free meals, then all of your meals are reimbursed at the free rate. So you really don't have a local contribution. We've done some math recently about what that looks like today. When you look at a school food authority wide and not just a building wide, Winooski schools are the only schools that are sort of in that position where they're fully funded by the federal program. The next slowest down would be Springfield School District, which would take them about $1,500 of local funds to participate in the program. Way down at the bottom of the list, trying to remember which school exactly, I think it was in the Mount Mansfield School District. That one individual school would cost $250,000 or $260,000 in local funds if they wanted to keep participating. But it is all up to the locals about whether to do this. And so really it's whether that desire is there at the local level to spend that money.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Senator, Representative Nelson.
Thanks for the upgrade, I think.
There's a glare on the screen. I'm sorry, I couldn't read it.
I don't recall, I've been on our school board for 14 years, and I don't recall the last 2 years and the end of the budget year, we've had to transfer money to cover food since we've gotten free meals for all. But prior to COVID, in 1 year, we had to transfer $14,000 Uh, because we feed all the kids regardless of whether they paid up to date or not. Um, am I correct in understanding the cost of this program is about $30 on the average home property taxes?
I can't speak to that. That's very much outside my my expertise.
Okay, I've heard that figure someplace.
I
I
think we
just,
did hear testimony on that, yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to verify that. But anyways, we had paid $14,000 just a few years ago before the start of the universal school meals, and I don't think we've had to transfer any over since. But I can check. Thank you.
I don't have the list of folks who haven't had to make a transfer just in my head, so I can't verify that for you, but certainly that would be reflective of the experience we've seen.
Yeah.
All right, so some other things to point out to you about this chart. I'm just checking time here. So in general, our enrollment is declining, and I do have to point out one correction to you. I apologize for this. The enrollment number this year is actually about 3,000 students lower than is shown on this. We were just going through today and double checking our reports before we published them for the field and realized that one school district had erroneously reported their population 3 times. So gave us some additional kids. And so that number is about 80,000, which is a decline from the prior year. And you'll see it's a pretty steady decline. And that makes our free and reduced rate this year 61.36%. And it makes our ADP for lunch 64%, and our ADP for breakfast 40%. So I will send over some corrections on that. Fortunately, that does not impact any of our estimates about how much things will cost, because we did those estimates this year based on the number of meals we served in October, which is a pretty typical month. And it doesn't impact later on in the report. I talk about the free claiming percentage, which is the amount of all the meals we serve, the amount of money that, the amount of meals that the federal government fully funds. And it doesn't impact that because I did that calculation in a different way. So I apologize for the error there. And we'll send over a correction on that. One place that it does impact the report is in the written testimony is I talked in the written testimony about how our average daily participation is kind of leveling off about 61%. And so with that revision, it's still climbing a little bit every year, although not dramatically. And because the overall number of kids has decreased, that means that actually, in some cases, we're either serving the same amount of meals, even though more higher percentage of kids are eating every day. Or in the case of breakfast, you can see between school year 22, 23 and 23, 24, we actually served slightly fewer meals, even though more kids were eating every day between those years. So that's just something to keep in mind is, declining student enrollment is generally a problem for the state, but when it comes to this program, it does mean that actually our overall costs are lower. All right, and then the federal value of USDA foods received, that increases based on the total number of meals we served. So it does not, it's not related to whether those are free, reduced, or paid meals. So that's grown in response to the number of meals that we're serving. And then the free and reduced percentage has grown significantly, and that is not reflective of there being more low-income kids. That's reflected in the way that we are identifying the kids for the purposes of drawing down these federal funds. So you will see in 18-19, we were about 40% of our students qualifying for free and reduced price meals. That drops significantly in school year 22-23, which was the first year of state-funded universal meals. That year, we were trying to get families to return applications without having that sort of carrot of the free meal. And so we thought, and we were right, that fewer families would return applications. And so that's why we see that decline that year. That's not reflective of a decline in student poverty. It's just a reflective of how many fewer students we were able to identify. But then you see it climb back up in school year 23-24. That is the first year that we participated in the Medicaid direct certification demonstration project. So this is an option offered by USDA. Once we participate, we get to keep participating. And it allows us to identify free and reduced eligible students based on families participating in Medicaid in households under 185% of the federal poverty level. So we're not just looking at all Medicaid households, but we're looking at that subset. And we're getting this information from the Department of Vermont Health Access. And we're then sharing that with the schools in order to be able to match and directly certify those students. That has been highly successful in identifying more than the students who we previously identified through applications. So that was really wonderful that we were able to do that. And then at the start of last school year, USDA made a change to the community eligibility provision that allowed more schools to qualify for that option. And that option is a lot more advantageous in terms of drawing down federal funds because it allows us to take the number of directly certified children. So those are the children who qualify for free and reduced price meals, for free meals, not through an application, but because we made those matches. We take that and we get to multiply that by 1.6, which is supposed to sort of account for the number of kids who might have qualified via an application. Now that we've got all these Medicaid direct certs, we're probably already identifying most of the kids who would have qualified via an application. So that 0.6 multiplier is really buying us additional kids in this program. And so that's why our free and reduced percentage jumped so high, because that's what we're, for the purposes of the child nutrition program, now able to claim. Again, not necessarily reflective of a giant jump in student poverty. So, and we did a lot of work at the start of this school year to take all of that information and lock in cycles using the current data that will be good for the next 4 years. And so this year's claiming percentages, unless for some reason we're able to identify more students in the future, this will be pretty consistent for the next 4 years if there were no change to the program. The thing that would be inconsistent is probably we're going to keep seeing a decline in overall student population. And so that's going to bring those costs down. Do you all have any other questions about this table?
If we had another row at the bottom, we don't know. Do we have estimates for enrollment looking out into the future? Does the state do that, or?
I haven't done that. You know, I will say that probably based on the trajectory we're on, it's going to be lower. We could do a little digging. I could talk to some other people and see if there's something we can put together. It's harder to project for the school meals programs because it's not just our public school enrollment, it's all these other schools as well. So.
I don't know if there were other questions, but did you have more that you wanted to?
Yeah, so if we've got time, I think I covered sort of why why this, let's see, the state funds, the second column over from the left, the education fund impact from the statewide universal school meals policy. So this is the state appropriation to cover universal school meals. We see in the first year, 22-23 was $22.1 million, then almost 21 million. No, sorry, 20.2 million, rounding on the fly here. And then this year we're projecting 17.3 to 17.5 million. This is significantly lower than our projections last spring when you were budgeting for this year. Reason for that is the Medicaid direct cert pilot and the CEP rule change that I was just talking about were much more successful than we thought in getting those claiming percentages up. Previously, our estimates hadn't accounted for the falling student population, so we're still doing our calculations with 84,000 students in mind. There was an additional factor. One of your biggest risks in terms of what this will cost is the state universal meal supplement. So the amount that the state is paying per meal is set to the difference between the federal and the federal free and the federal paid reimbursement rate. So the federal government does reimburse you for every paid, or reimburse the schools for every paid status meal. So children who don't qualify for free and reduced price meals, but it's a much lower rate than what they reimburse for the free and reduced meals. And so it's the difference between those two rates that is the universal meal supplement, and the state law sets that to the difference between whatever the feds set those two numbers at. The federal numbers grow every year based on the May to May change, the 1-year change in the consumer price index for the food away from home. So this is food served at restaurants and cafeterias and that kind of thing across the country, and looking at what that CPI change is. So we did our estimates last year, assuming a CPI change of 4.5%, and it ended up being more like 4%. This year, we're still using 4.5% to project for next year. Right now, looking at January to January CPI meals away from home, it's about 3.9%. But who knows what's going to happen with food prices in the next few months. We've got avian flu, we've got various trade stuff happening. So I would still advise being conservative there, because if there was going to be significant inflation between now and May, that could significantly increase the per meal reimbursement that you end up paying next year. So you just want to be careful about that. Okay. So we won't talk about plate waste unless you've got particular, yeah.
Yeah, Representative Nelson.
Thank you. Any concerns? Of course, we can't speculate, but are there any concerns on flow of federal dollars supplementing this program that's working so well for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's certainly something we're keeping a close eye on. These funds are all, written into the National School Lunch Act. So Congress would need to take action to change that. It's not something that the administration has the power to just stop paying states for the per meal reimbursement. That's all in law. That being said, there have been a couple of proposals that would impact the school meals programs in Congress. One is to increase the threshold for schools to participate in the community eligibility provision. Right now, it's 25% of the students directly certified for free meals. And so with that, the vast majority of our schools in the state are able to qualify. There's a proposal to increase that to 60%. And FRAC has done a little analysis of that found that about 188 of our schools would no longer qualify. We can, for CEP, so they would have to switch over to Provision 2. We can group schools in order to try and get them up above that threshold, as long as they're within the same school food authority, which is Supervisory Union School District. I mentioned Winooski earlier. They are their own school food authority. So even though they're above that threshold, their additional number of identified students is sort of being wasted. We're not able to draw down additional federal money. So as you're talking about school consolidation, that is one of the factors. If they were in a larger school food authority, there would be more opportunity to group them with other schools and draw down more federal funding, even if that threshold changed. That proposal, I haven't seen anything other than just it was on an initial list of ideas. I haven't seen any language, depending on whether it actually went through, depending on the timing of it, and depending on whether USDA was directed to make the change immediately for next school year. I'm sort of doubtful that they could do that given the amount of time it takes for rulemaking. Depending on whether they required schools who no longer qualified to restart their cycles, or whether they allowed schools who had already qualified to be grandfathered in until the end of their cycle, and the law just applied going forward. Like, all those variables would really impact what happened here. So without language, we don't know what that would mean. But it's definitely a risk, and something that we are keeping a close eye on. And if that changed, we'd be needing to have a real conversation about what that impact was. The other change that they're talking about for school meals, same kind of area. It's just in those sort of list of proposals, but I haven't seen any language. Both of these would have to make their full way through Congress. Would be to require that if schools were participating in a pricing program and they were collecting free and reduced meal applications, that the schools would have to conduct verification on 100% of the applications they received, rather than the current law, which is 3%. Verification means that you have to require that the family provide pay stubs or tax documents to show that their application is correct. It would be a huge amount of additional work for the local schools who are processing those applications. And it likely has the impact of reducing the number of kids who qualify via an application because families are just a lot less likely to respond to that verification request. Not necessarily because they don't qualify, but just it's a lot of work to pull that information and share that with your school. So right now, those are the two things that we're seeing that could impact us. Obviously, long-term changes that impact the number of kids enrolled in Three Squares Vermont or SNAP or Medicaid could impact this because it would reduce the number of children directly certified. But as I mentioned, we've sort of locked in these rates for a cycle. And so even if there was a decline in the number of kids who are directly certified next year, we would not see that impact in the school meals programs for another few years. Okay.
I know you wanted to talk about summer.
I do really want to talk about summer.
Yeah.
This is the fun part. So, but I do want to make sure I've answered all your questions before we move on to that.
I'm wondering in the context of the summer programs and universal school meals, there's a connection that we talked about a couple of years ago. Can you explain what that is?
So if you look at there's a map in here. Sorry, page 13 of your written testimony. And there is a link to the map in here at the beginning of this section and also right below the map. So this is an interactive mapping tool that the Agency of Digital Services helped us make about all the locations that are now what's called area eligible for free summer meals and free after school snacks and meals. So these are two other federal child nutrition programs that we also operate through our office. And these programs are a little bit different in the school meals programs in that if a location is considered area eligible, which means that they've demonstrated that many low-income children live there, then they are allowed to offer free meals through these programs, summer meals and after school meals, using full federal funding. So they get the equivalent of a free reimbursement rate for each meal that they serve. And they don't have to check the status of the students. And it's not like a percentage of the meals or anything like that. It's just all the meals are served at the same rate. And so in the, mine here is black and white, but the online version of this shows this map in color. And because of the CEP multiplier and taking the number of kids who are directly certified, which is now higher because of the community eligibility provision, because of Medicaid direct cert. So we've got a higher number of kids who are directly certified, and the schools are now participating in the community eligibility provision. So they're allowed to use that 1.6 multiplier. That additional 0.6 is enough to get 101 additional schools up above that 50% threshold that makes them area eligible for these other programs. If they weren't participating in CEP, they would probably be below that 50% threshold and they would not be area eligible. So there is a close tie there. It's because of the CEP participation that we're able to get everybody up over that threshold.
EP again is one of the universal meal.
Yeah, it's the more advantageous of the two federal options, but you have to, not all schools qualify for it. That 101 schools, all those schools are now eligible for this, but they also make all the towns in their attendance area eligible. So that's equated to 127 towns that are newly area eligible for summer and after school meals this coming summer, which is huge. Like it means that the map of most of the state is now area eligible. And then we're able to add some census data to that as well that makes a few more pockets of the state area eligible. And so, we've never had all these towns eligible for these programs before, so we don't have a history of operating these programs there. And once a program operates there based on area eligibility, they're sort of grandfathered into the program for the next 5 years, that site, whatever that location is. So that pool for, that library, that location gets to claim that area eligibility for the next 5 years, even if the school data changes. So no matter what happens at the federal level, what happens at the state level, if we can lock in sites now on this map, that's a huge opportunity to keep that funding coming to those sites for the next 5 years. And I will say that so far, these two other programs have not been really under discussion at the federal level for any changes. So that could change, but right now, this seems like a really good opportunity. We also, USDA a couple years ago made changes to allow for the summer meals program. It used to be that the kids had to come on site and eat the meals on site there. Since the pandemic, they've made a change that allows the kids to take the meals off site, and also allows the site to provide like a meal kit or a set of meals for the whole week for the families. And so you can do weekly distributions of these sort of meal kits. And that's been highly successful. It makes sense that in our kind of remote areas that getting to a site for breakfast and lunch every single day is a real challenge in the summer. So we were able to really, with this, it's called the non-congregate summer option, we were able to really dramatically increase the number of meals served this last summer. We think there's still huge opportunity. Particularly in the Northeast Kingdom, we have a lot of congregate summer meal sites where kids come to a park or a summer program. We really don't have a lot of non-congregate options up there. So that's an area where we really like to expand the number of non-congregate meals. And then in the Rutland Bennington corridor, there's just really not a lot of summer meal sites generally. There's been less interest from the school meals programs in that area and setting up sites, and we just haven't had as much interest there. So those are two areas of the state where we're particularly looking for help. But if you look at this map, it's an interactive mapper. You can see what places are area eligible. If you have a location in your districts that you think would be a good site, the next step is either to talk to your local food service director at your schools. They can just go ahead and set up a site with you, and we don't even, they'll talk to us. We don't have to really be involved. Or you can reach out to us on my team and we'll connect you with the appropriate folks. So we're not asking you to operate a summer meal site. We're just asking you to tell us where one should be operated, and who would be the people responsible for that site, and we can make that happen. We're especially looking for programs that are already operating. So if there's already a place where kids are gathering in the summer or an after-school program that doesn't have a meals component, we really want to make those connections in particular.
Has the agency quantified I'm thinking back to the universal school meals, to the nexus here, whether participation in universal school meals statewide can be directly tied to a dollar figure of summer program assistance?
I think the problem with the summer programs is that there's this potential. Like you could have, all these summer meal sites all over the state. If we don't have anybody on the ground to set it up, they're not going to have a site, and we're not going to draw down the federal funds. So it's really hard to calculate the potential.
What other questions did we have that anybody might have had earlier in the day or earlier in the week that Rosie might be able to answer?
I asked a question of a speaker we had earlier today about in terms of the universal school meals, and there were, you said 69 schools that had free meals provided before this rest of the state did. Do we have any sense now? I mean, my impression from my area is that all the towns that I represent love it, and it's from different school districts.
Mm-hmm.
What's your sense in terms of the school districts around the state? What kind of feedback have you got? What would your expectation be? Or do you have data? How many schools are going to want to continue this, even if it's officially repealed?
Yeah, I mean, they all have that option.
Yeah.
I will, in school year 1920, which I didn't give you data on because it was that weird year, the start of that school year, we had 77 schools participating.
Yep.
And that included, I believe, Slate Valley decided that year to start participating, even though they were actually not drawing down as much federal funding. So they had to put a lot more local funding into that. We haven't collected, we'd have to survey schools to find out. We haven't done that. I think it would be similar to a lot of things that we see where the more affluent areas would, it's all local voter decisions about how much to increase school budgets. And so I think while a district like Springfield only costs $1,500, you may see, mean, I can't imagine that that would be enough to be a hurdle, but Springfield was one district that some of their schools qualified for CEP before, and they didn't do it because they were worried about the amount of local funding they'd have to put in. So, much more cost sensitive than some other areas of the state. So you'd really see that variable, can we ask the voters in our town to do this? And I think that's really what it would be based on rather than the actual cost for that district. And then I think timing wise, if this were to go into effect next year, you would also see some difficulties with school budgets because folks have planned for it. I think you'd see a lot of folks using reserve funds and then making a decision the following year about whether we ask voters to pay for it.
So we would.
But we don't have any data.
So we would go back to the model of some communities, everybody would eat, and some communities, it would be income qualified, and some kids wouldn't eat. And
Yeah, and I think we've seen enough enthusiasm about universal school meals that you would have a lot more communities deciding to go ahead and put local money towards it, but I don't have any numbers for you about which ones or anything.
And just to be clear, when we say local money, it's actually state money because it's all coming out of that state education. But all right, well, this has been, wow, a lot of numbers and a lot of different things thrown at us. So thank you for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
If we have other questions going forward, we'll know where to find you. Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier to most of you, I thought it would be a good idea to check in and see whether via straw poll or in place where feel like we can make a recommendation to the rest of the House, to the other committees that are dealing with the budget. Since this is a budget question ultimately, on whether whether we want to continue to include school meals in the budget or whether we want to repeal it. And I feel like we could continue to take testimony probably all spring because there's so much out there. We did 2 years ago take a lot of testimony and then got to a point where we felt like we've heard enough to make a decision. We've got, I know 2 of us are not here, but I did check with them and Michelle was a witness to at least one of those conversations. Jed is our clerk, but since he's not here, Greg, I don't know if you can reach over. Does Jed have a sheet of paper that is?
You can rip one out of my,
Okay, yeah, if you want to do the notepad, that's fine.
yeah.
the straw poll is just a tally anyway, right? You don't actually do each person, or do you?
Well, yeah, I think we do. I think we can take, it's very nebulous about how you do it, but the point, I think the point we want to make to other, to the rest of the committee is that there's either support or not supporting. That's probably the big thing. So question is, I think, do we support, I'll word it this way, does the committee support maintaining universal school meals in the budget for going forward? And so you can call the roll, acting clerk, and then record our votes accordingly.
So. Counterclockwise.
Is it yay or yes?
You can say yes.
Yes.
Okay. Richard, what's your vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Jen reported a yes as well.
I think you should call out each name.
Oh,
I know you haven't done this before. And
I have not.
You haven't been trained either, so thank you for stepping in.
Chairman Durkee.
Yes. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Yes.
Let Sidonia vote.
I was just gonna. Just for.
So did you say you talked to John or no?
I would tell you how Jed wants to vote, but I won't do it, but
He
he and I
already told-
discussed it.
You already called us.
So,
Yeah.
Chair Durkee,
Yeah, and I think what we can do is hold it open, but John did say yes, yeah. So technically, when we're doing an actual vote, there isn't any option if you're not here, you're just not counted. That's under the rules of the House. Straw polls are a little different. I will double check so that we're following everything and when I report it, report it correctly.
and when the clerk votes, do I call out?
Yes, yeah, you can call it your own.
Representative Burt, what is your vote?
You only know.
Yes.
Wow. No, that's being recorded. It's a.
All right, so then you can announce the total.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 0 abstains.
Perfect. Right, good. And 2 of those being provisional. And I will be putting together a letter to send to the other committees, which I'll share with the committee when we're back on Tuesday. And thank you, everybody. I know there's been a lot of learning on a subject that I didn't know a lot about, and it's somewhat out of our wheelhouse, but we had worked on it a couple of years ago, and that was helpful.
Chairman,
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
does someone need to go to appropriations to champion this from our committee?
They will very likely want to hear from us at some point. I'm not sure when.
I'd be willing to do it. I'll come out of my shell.
You might cause trouble.
That is very generous of you, and we will be sure to, I don't know if they will take all 8 of us, but I think anybody who wants to go is probably, you're welcome to come along, whenever that is. So thank you. Good. Well, it's getting late on Friday afternoon, so if there isn't anything else, I'm not sure if the agenda is posted yet, but just.
Let's finalize it.
Yeah, okay. When you may see on the agenda that we're starting at 9:30 as usual next week, Wednesday, Thursday. Keep an eye on that because it could change if something comes up. It could be as early as 9. Otherwise usual schedule, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Hey.
week.